everyone, and welcome to the All Things ITSM Global Podcast. I'm Kirsty McGowan. I'm here today with Carlos Casanova. Hi, Carlos.
Hey, Kirsty, how are you?
And Charlie Betts. Hi, Charlie.
Kirsty, how are you?
Very well, thanks, Charlie. And today we are talking with Nancy van Elsacker from Top Desk. Hi, Nancy. Nice to have you on board.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me, Chrissy.
Hello, Nancy. Welcome to the podcast. We're glad to have you on today. Nancy, our industry keeps on changing, and we've talked for probably far longer than we cared to about communicating across silos and communicating across departments. And I think we all recognize that regardless of the technologies, it all really comes down to, how do we do that, and sort of this shared service management sort of approach to things. So I guess I'm curious as to your perspective on that. There's so many different components in terms of, how everyone, works together and communicates with each other. How do you see that kind of playing out as we move forward?
Yes, it is. As you said, it's a very topical subject and a matter where a lot of organizations come into contact with. How I see it is that there's really a growth model where organizations go through different steps, ranging from sharing nothing to begin with towards sharing one tool to follow up everything. Of course, the tool isn't everything, as you mentioned. It's very much an organizational and process-driven thing, the shared service management. So that's also one of the steps that we see could be a shared service desk, shared processes. So I think there's still a lot that's going to happen on this subject, because a lot of organizations are starting to do something with it, and they're in one of those growth steps, really depending on their where they are. But there's still a long way to go, I feel.
I think it's sort of it's that circle that we're coming to where people working in IT are actually starting to realise that they don't work in IT, that they work in a business as a whole, and bringing those areas where customers need to talk to the business together into a shared setting really seems to make sense.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, it's also shared service management could be considered as part of the empowering of people, I believe, and empowering of the business. More and more IT leaders are discovering that actually the support they're giving to the people is empowering not only the people themselves, but especially the business. And yeah, who could not be who could not see the advantages of that, I'd say. And for end users, it's really, it's heaven if they just can ask questions to just one point, being a portal or a person or however it's organized. And they don't have to think about it. They can just focus on their day-to-day job and what they are best at. I think that's one of the major advantages, yes.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of interesting extremes, or a couple interesting ways that this can play out. I mean, on the one hand, you say, as you say, if the service provider is focused on an outcome, is bringing together a number of different pieces of value together, such as, say, an employee onboarding service. And we've all been through the employee onboarding, where you need facilities, you need security, you need hardware provisioning, you need various kinds of access granted, and so on and so forth. And it's always the same. And so why can't you just have it as a service? And if you have a complete end-to-end service owner, I think that is very valuable. But on the other hand, sometimes we see services that are stood up and they are fine-grained. So you simply have the provision a network circuit service, and because they think they're doing service management, they give this very small, fine-grained service, and perhaps they surround it with a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of inquiries for perfect information. If you don't have the perfect information, well, we're going to put your ticket at the bottom, or we're not going to consider it even an open service request. So I think we see both the positive and the negative of this paradigm. It can be used very well, and it can also be used in less successful ways.
So, Nancy, I'm curious, when you're working in that space, I mean, do you see the organizations go more with the process side of it, the technology side of it? And to Charlie's point, do you see the extreme happening for any particular reason? Is it, if they go with the technology, do they end up at that fine granular level, or in the process side a little too high? I'm just kind of curious as to how you see the implementations go.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so we actually see different steps, and however organizations approach it is very different. Some organizations really start by sharing a tool, then aligning processes, and then changing organizationally to one service desk. But really, it really matters on the type of organization. Sometimes it just starts by putting the people together, and then they work towards sharing a tool. The major or one of the most important things when going through any kind of shared service alignment, I believe, is to keep in mind that one doesn't exist without the other. So, which means you cannot just focus on the tool or just focus on the process or on the organizational level. Even if you start by sharing a tool, you always have to keep in mind the processes and the organizational impact as well. And I guess that's where some of the implementations have some challenges, because they focus too much on one of the three pillars, where they actually are equally important.
Mm-hmm.
So we were talking before we started too about I think everyone's favourite acronym at the moment, which is Siam. So have you been at? You were saying you've had some involvement in some of the getting Siam out into the world in your recent assignments, Nancy. So what have you been noticing about the uptake of the whole ethos of Siam?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so actually, for me, it started by linking it to the shared service management. We've been focusing so much on working together internally within organizations, putting or getting rid of those silos within organizations. But actually, kind of a thing that's going on is that there's a lot more outsourcing going on, especially with all the SaaS solutions and other outsourcing activities. And right now, I believe the silos are more the internal organization versus the suppliers we work with. So to me, that really was the next step we are looking at. And linking them together. I believe around the working together with the suppliers, it's still kind of like a black box, I sometimes call it, because we just don't see what happens. We send things over to our suppliers, and then we kind of lose control of what's happening. And I believe that's what the next big challenge is going to be, where a lot of organizations are going to work on a lot more in detail.
Do you use the term service broker at all? Do you recognize that term, or is that something that you see coming up in the industry as people talk about Siam and using outsourced services?
So it is a term that is used. What I do believe is that a lot of organizations actually use very different definitions, and a lot of organizations don't even use definitions because they're not educated yet, or it's just a topic that hasn't been written about a lot. The things I see about Siam that I've read about is a lot focused focused on the technicalities of it. Whereas, focusing on the process and organizational side, where you get into contact with service brokers and those kind of definitions, are a lot more important. But I do feel that the market hasn't been really talking about that a lot, or at least that clients don't really grasp what the idea behind it is.
So, Nancy, how does I mean, we see every company going more and more into a sort of a client supplier sort of model. How does this impact suppliers? Is it something that's going to make it a little more beneficial? Is it more difficult to transition? How do you see that whole relationship with suppliers play out in this model?
So it's not only a challenging thing for the clients themselves; it's also challenging for the suppliers. Indeed, it's a very, very, very good question, actually, because we don't always think about that side of it. I believe for suppliers, up to some time ago, they could just do practically anything. They weren't held accountable as much as they are going to be in the Siam evolution. It makes sense. I mean, a lot of organizations are outsourcing a lot more business critical stuff than they did in the past. So we are going to hold them accountable for it. So I believe that they also are professionalizing a lot, just to cope with those new challenges or demands, even.
Right, because I guess my concern is, and I think, I mean, I've seen it firsthand. I'm sure you have, and Charlie and Kirsty, you as well. The biggest concern that I have isn't so much the outsourcing or using suppliers and vendors, for whether it's low level stuff or critical stuff. The concern that I have is in a space that we're in now in 2016, and we hear the terms user experience coming up constantly. If we continue to push things off site to vendors, suppliers, outsource providers, whatever we want to call them, we need to, I think, ensure that it's still seamless for the end user. And what I see a lot of times happening is the end user ends up stuck in the middle. They're trying to get something done. They go to their actual organization and they're like, hey, I want, whatever. Oh, you need to go talk to XYZ company. They do all of our managed services for that space. Okay, fine. So they go and they work that out and they kind of get accustomed to that. Then then 6 months later, something comes up, there's an incident or there's an issue. Well, some of the information wasn't shared between the supplier or the service provider and the internal organization that has the service desk, or maybe a third organization which does the service desk for the primary company. And then the end user seems to get stuck in the middle of trying to facilitate the sharing of information across 3 multi-million or billion-dollar contracts just to get their login to work. Yeah. So I guess I'm curious, is this the road we're heading down? Because I mean, that's what I see today. I mean, and do you really see something like Siam and maybe other things helping that that risk be mitigated?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's actually it's one of the challenges that also came up with the shared service management internally. It's all about communication, right? The customer has to be informed at each step, and just like the end user doesn't care, or the customer doesn't care if it's IT or facilities or HR solving their problem, they don't care if it's internal or external. They just want their problems fixed. So there is a big challenge for the communication part, because the extra challenge is that once we go to suppliers, they probably are used to using different kind of communication channels. So it's the big thing is about bringing it all together. Actually, one of the things we've been talking about here at Topdesk is that we might even see in the future that organizations, professional organizations such as the HDIs or other or ITSMF of this world, they might even come up with a standard of communicating. might be one of the ideas that everybody can use the same standards to make that process more smooth. But it is one of the big challenges right now. Yes, it definitely is.
Charlie,
That's
I see
definitely.
you glowing.
Yeah, well, we're having this conversation in the IT for IT forum about especially what we call the incident. I think we call it incident exchange or incident case exchange for starters. And I think we think that there is an interest in this because, as you say, if you've got multiple service providers, they need to all be on the same page. The other thing that I start to see is that if the provisioning and execution mechanism of the service providers is based on first in, first out, take a number and we serve you in the order in which you take a number. What happens when you are trying to achieve some value that depends on 2 or 3 service providers responding at a given time, and now they don't have visibility into your value timing? So this is where I think you start to see a real push for automation. But when you have people in the loop, when you have people, having to intervene and assess the ticket, prioritize it, do some human value add, then, if you're a project manager and you're going to need, 3 or 4 service providers to all come together in a synchronized way, it gets very difficult.
Yeah, and Charlie, the one thing that I'll add to that, and definitely curious, Nancy, on your take, in addition to what Charlie said, I hate to throw the term in there, but where do the contracts come into play? Because I've heard service providers say, "Hey, we'd love to help you, but it's not within our contract, or our contract said, Charlie." Then this is what made me think about it is on the inbound, hey, we want new services, but the provider doing that task is only capturing 7 bits of information. On the back end, somebody that's supporting it needs 10 bits of information. Contractually, they're both meeting or trying to meet their needs, but if it doesn't come into the machine, how can it come out of the machine? So I guess I'm just, I hate to even throw that whole contractual piece into it, but it seems like that sometimes even gets more in the way of everything.
Yeah, it's it's. I think it can be a very complicated fact. It's really hard to see a quick solution for it. I guess it's what I always hope for is that people will simplify matters as much as possible, especially to have a better collaboration. But yeah, it's something we have to see, and I guess people don't always feel the pain yet of this fact. So not a lot has been done yet. We try to find workarounds or figure out ways to overcome those collaboration difficulties. But simplifying contracts would definitely be something that should be on everybody's agenda, I guess.
Yeah, I think a lot of the times in these environments where we're using a lot of outsourcers too, your poor service desk operator seems to be the filling in the middle of the sandwich and gets it from both sides. The customer not happy, and the supplier not happy with what's being provided as well. So it's going to be a tough world for a little bit longer, I think, as people get to grips with how this new way of working is going to play out, and it's only going to keep growing. So anyway, Nancy, I think we're out of time, and I think it's been a great chat this morning. It's been really good to have you on the podcast, and thanks, Carlos. Thanks, Charlie, for your time today.
Thank you, Kirsty. Thank you, Nancy.
Thanks, Nancy.
Great.
Thanks you for having me. Yeah.
It's been our pleasure.